Hello, I'm Miss Kilburn Bond, and in this revision video we're going to be looking at writing an effective article. We're going to start to explore the big picture about the role of rhetoric and of opinionated article writing in society. That's to help you see the big picture, the context of why this type of writing exists, and hopefully that will enable you to then think about how you can create the voice of someone who fits into that context, so you can be a convincing journalist. We're going to analyse how rhetorical devices can be used by writers to create a relationship with their intended reader and persuade them to agree with the writer's viewpoint. We'll pick up on that word viewpoint later, but it's really important that if you're going to be an effective writer, you're very aware of the reader that you're aiming your work at, and we're going to look at how that sounds when it's done really well. We're going to understand the structural features of article writing. That's the organisation, how ideas are put together in the best way so that your writing has impact. And then finally exploring the importance of planning strategies in order to develop a cohesive and sequenced argument. Because without the skills to be able to plan and knowledge about how you can plan effectively, it's going to be very difficult for you to do your best writing. And this will help you with the GCSE English Language Paper 2 Section B. So what you can see on the screen there is a picture of a puppet. And if we think about a puppet being controlled and this little sort of wooden person there, could every movement that they make being controlled by the hand that's holding those strings, that's going to help us see this analogy of being the writer of an article. The writer is the person with the hand and your reader is the puppet underneath, because by creating a piece of persuasive writing, in creating an article where you're giving across a particular viewpoint, what you need to do to be successful is to be the hand that's got the puppet. You need to make your reader really buy into what you're trying to say, so you can start to influence the way that they are thinking and responding. And to understand that fully, we're actually needing to go back in time and look at ancient Greek civilization, where the word rhetoric comes from. Now, you will have heard the word rhetoric in your English lessons, or rhetorical devices. Rhetoric often linked to speeches, but can also apply to the writing of articles, because what we're looking at is really powerful language that is used to get across perspectives and viewpoints and influence the reactions of our audience or our reader. And if we think about Aristotle, I'm sure a name you've heard from history, Aristotle, when thinking about rhetoric, put forward these three words that help us think about how we write in a way that gets our opinions, our viewpoints across. He talked about our writing fitting these three patterns of ethos, pathos, and logos. And those three words can help us when we are writing our own articles, because what we need to try and achieve is exactly the same as Aristotle was saying in ancient Greece we need to be trying to achieve. We need, as the writer, to have credibility, ethos. We need to be able to assert our point of view, sound like we know what we're talking about, that we've thought this issue through, we've got facts and evidence to back it up, and then we can use that to build our argument. We need pathos. We need to be emotional about what we're writing about. We need our reader to feel emotional when they're reading it, because that's how we change people's minds and thoughts. And then finally, we need logos. We need logic. We need to be able to logically set out a convincing, well-founded, well-supported argument that's not just pulled from the air, but is actually based on some concrete examples and evidence. And to bring that up to date, what we see in our society today is an awful lot of what we could call opinion journalism. Journalism that we might find through social media, we might find on the internet, we might find in a newspaper, but where journalists are not reporting on news stories in a factual way, but adding to where in a newspaper, yes, there will be those factual articles, but there'll also be opinion pieces where article writers take a topic that might be related to something that's happened in the news or something that's a current interest in society and write their opinion about it. Blogs serve that function as well, often found on the internet. So in your lifetime, you will come across this opinion journalism an awful lot. And what we're going to be looking at in this video is how you then understand the techniques that are used to make this type of journalism effective, so you can write your own article and be proud of what you've done. So still on this theme of bringing this up to date, in the GCSE English Language AQA paper, paper 2, that's where you could be asked to write an article. And the whole exam paper is given a title itself that's called Writers' Viewpoints and Perspectives. That's the title of the exam paper, so that should tell you that when you're being assessed for this particular paper, one of the things that's going to be looked at is whether you as a writer can really successfully put across your own viewpoints and your own perspectives. So that's why planning is going to be so important to this video, because you can't do that effectively unless you spend time in that exam hall just thinking through what your argument's going to be, how you're going to develop your perspective. Now, the best article writing, so this is what this video is all about, trying to get you to be the best writer you can be. The best article writing will have personality and a clear voice and point of view. Those are words that were taken from examiners' reports. That's what the examiners are always impressed with. They want to feel like from the beginning to the end of your article, there's a really clear idea of who you are, what your point of view is. And by personality, meaning that it's not really dull sentences that don't have any humour or emotion in them, that you're actually trying to write in that lively individual style. So the key characteristics of an article would be it's typically short. So if we were to look online and in newspapers, you'd find most of these sorts of articles between 750 and 800 words. You will know in 45 minutes what you're capable of writing, what kind of length that's going to be. Really, really effective articles have a clearly defined point of view. So from beginning to end, it's really obvious to you as the reader what the writer thinks about this topic, what their point of view is. And that clarity of thinking in that next bullet point is evident all the way through. So it's not just a strong opinion, but it's a strong opinion that is supported by evidence, by reasoning. And then finally, it contains the strong distinctive voice of the writer. This is called idiolect. So just like everybody's got an individual fingerprint, everybody's voice is unique, everybody's writing style is unique, and the examiners, they want to see that. They want to see that you're trying to bring your own style to that piece of writing, that it sounds interesting and different. So what you can see now is an example of what that question in the exam might look like. So we're into section B, the writing part of the paper. You're advised to spend about 45 minutes on this section. You must write in full sentences. You're reminded of the need to plan your answer. You should leave enough time to check your work at the end. So there's a bit of advice there from the examiner about the importance of planning, and then at the other end, the importance of checking through what you've done so you can remove any little mistakes that you might notice. And if we skip the question but just go straight down to the bottom right hand corner where you can see the marks, this is worth 40 marks. It's a huge part of your GCSE, so really important that you give it the time and that you go into the exam feeling super confident about how you can approach this question. You get 24 marks for your content and your organisation, so the ideas that you put into your article and the way that you organise it. And then 16 marks are for technical accuracy. So we're looking at spelling, we're looking at punctuation, we're thinking about vocabulary choices, grammar. All those things are going to be really important to your success in this question. So if we look at the question itself, question 5, it will always start with a statement, a viewpoint that comes from somebody else, and it will be on an issue that's linked to what you've seen in the reading section in some way. Chewing gum is harmless. It doesn't disrupt learning, so should not be on the list of things we are not allowed to have in our school bag. That's somebody's opinion about the role of chewing gum in school. Here's the task. Write an article for the school magazine arguing your point of view on this statement. Write an article for the school magazine arguing your point of view on this statement. So before we do anything else, we're going to listen to an article that's been written in response to this question. And as you can see from the picture there, this is an article about chewing gum, and in this case is going to be arguing that chewing gum should be a banned substance in schools. And I'm going to thank Mr. Cridge, who is very kindly going to read this article for you.
No point in chewing on it. Good riddance to grotesque gum, says Stan Athel. There's nothing charming in chewing in the classroom. There's a creeping blight afflicting our school communities. A so-called fashion statement that goes beyond the trainer brand you're wearing, the bag you're carrying, or the music you have saved in your playlist. The finishing touch to the new version of cool in school seems to involve the incessant movement of the jaw, the constantly maddening mastication and monstrous mouth exercise that is the addictive practice of chewing gum. How many of you honestly enjoy listening to the sound of saliva swishing around anyone's mouth? And what exactly is attractive about seeing the white splodge of semi-chewed gum skimming, or that should be scumming, over someone's teeth? Some people even play with the gum whilst they're chewing it. You must have seen them. They have one finger close to their lips and every so often they insert this digit into their mouth and play stretch the gum. I've had to endure this from the student I sit next to in my maths lesson. They wrap the gum around their finger, take it out to admire their handiwork, and then put it back in their mouth for some more chomping. What chance do I have of concentrating on the finer details of geometry when this grotesque behaviour is happening within a metre of my own face? Those that regularly swallow gum have mountains of breath-freshening spearmint gloop lying undigested in their stomachs. And whilst I accept that horror stories of this being the case for years and years are now recognised by food scientists as unfounded, it is true that chewing gum resin is indigestible. Our bodies are clever, complicated and canny. So, if our digestive tract expels chewing gum through to the colon without taking any goodness from it, that tells me everything I need to know about chewing gum's pointless existence in the world. If this was the only problem with gum, I could simply avoid making friends with any chewies and try not to sit near them in lessons. However, I find that these chewing gum fanatics take their addiction a stage further and think that it is acceptable to use that one piece of gum to inflict acts of gum terrorism on the rest of the school community. As you've probably guessed, I'm talking about the discarding of gum in totally inappropriate places. Under the desk, on the floor, down the side of the seat, smeared over the walls and even inside books. Why do people think that throwing gum on the floor is somehow less selfish than throwing an empty crisp packet into a field? It is still litter. What's more, those chewing gum criminals who stick their used gum under the desk are committing biological warfare on the rest of us. I bet it's happened to all of you. You accidentally put your finger in someone's old gum. You step on it and it's stuck to your shoe for hours. You find it glued to your clothes. It might be better not to think about the bacteria that lurk within, delighted to have a new host. If you look closely the next time that you are walking along the tarmac areas around schools, you will notice hundreds of dirty grey spots. This isn't a form of tarmac measles. It is simply the product of years of gum abuse. Each little drop of gum is stepped into the pavement by thousands of feet, and eventually it leaves a permanent scar. In my opinion, these gum villains should have their hair stuck together with gum and then sent out to scrape the gum off our school's spaces with their fingernails. This isn't such an outrageous suggestion. In Singapore, a chewing gum ban in 1992 has succeeded in keeping the city streets and buses free from this toxic waste, aiming to create a first world oasis of tidiness and good behaviour. Why don't we want the same for our society? Because this isn't only a curse of the school campus. Keep Britain Tidy research estimates that 87% of city streets are stained with gum. The consequence of this is that chewing gum litter wastes millions of pounds of taxpayers' money every year. The annual clean-up cost is estimated at £7 million. Back in Singapore, since 2004, there is a nod to those who believe in the therapeutic powers of gum chewing, in that pharmacists and dentists are allowed to sell gum to customers with a medical prescription. In the same way that some students have access arrangements for exams, authorised exit cards to seek mental health support, or differentiated resources to support specific learning needs, the pastoral leaders in schools could easily give concessions to those students who need to chew for dental reasons or because the action of chewing soothes an anxious mind. This controlled compromise would significantly reduce acts of gum vandalism both inside and outside of the classroom. This isn't a conundrum that really needs any more chewing over. The answer is obvious. Add chewing gum to the list of banned substances in every school. Empower teachers to react to those who try and chew their way around the rules, and educate students to see the benefits of a future that is gloriously gum-free.
Thank you, Mr. Cridge. So if we go back to the question and the planning, the importance of that planning time, a good exam tip for you before you start trying to write an article like we've just heard is to ask 3 really important questions that are very quick to ask and answer, but will really set you up to be planning in the right way. And those 3 questions, they all start with a W, so it's easy to remember: www, like a website, what and who and why. So here we've got our question again, and you can see colour coded there. We've got the what and the who and the why highlighted. So what is it that you're being asked to write? Well, you can see highlighted in green, the answer to that is an article. So you need to be absolutely certain about what the examiner's asking from you. An article's different to a letter, an article's different to a speech. You need to be able to identify how you're going to make your writing be presented like an article. You need to demonstrate knowledge of the conventions of article writing in your answer. The second question to ask yourself is who? Who is this piece of writing aimed at? So highlighted in blue, the answer to that, well, it's going to go in a school magazine. So take note of your intended reader. In this case, you're mainly aiming to engage students and teachers at your school. This should be absolutely clear in your writing. It needs to sound like you've thought about those particular people in that particular context. Then in this yellowy orange, arguing your point of view. That's the why. Why are you being asked to write this article? What's your purpose? What is it you're trying to create in terms of a feeling and a style? So before you start your plan, think carefully about the purpose of the article. Use the information in the question to identify this. So we know we're arguing your point of view, and it's got to be linked back to the statement. So the statement being this idea that you should be allowed chewing gum in your school bag, that it's harmless, that it doesn't need to be banned. So your purpose is either to argue that yes, you agree, or to argue that no, you don't agree. And it's absolutely brilliant to have a strong opinion. You'd be making this up in the exam. You don't have to argue something you really believe, but what you need to do is to make sure that all the way through your article you have a clear point of view and you stick to that. So your planning time, so important. It only takes 5 minutes. Don't spend longer than that, but you need to practice what that 5 minutes feels like. So really good revision tip there. Rather than sitting down for 45 minutes to practice for this exam all the time, just sit down in little chunks of 5 minutes, find yourself a question and practice what it feels like to plan in that time. Now, a plan is a very individual thing. Some of you might really like using mind maps or flow diagrams. Some of you might be happier just simply making a list of bullet points. It doesn't really matter what you do so long as you actually plan. So instead of telling you exactly how to do it, there are some questions on the slide there that you can ask yourself when you're planning to structure your article. Think, do I have a clearly defined topic, a focus and a theme, your overarching point of view? You cannot even start a plan until you've decided whether you're going to argue for or whether you're going to argue against the statement that you're given. You need to then start to think, right, for my opinion, I need several different points that I'm going to make, and you need to, in your plan, think what's the best order to put those points in? How are you going to sequence them? Which one makes sense as an opening argument, and which one do you want to leave till the end because it brings everything together and has most impact? How are you going to add substance to your argument? Can you think of any evidence, any proof, any stories that will be able to make your argument sound more convincing? And you do need to keep going back to this question, who cares? You've got to be aware of your audience, your reader all the time. Who is it you're trying to convince and why? How are you going to target that specific reader? So if we're talking about a school magazine and we're talking about chewing gum being part of either a banned or a welcomed substance in a school bag, then everything throughout your article should sound like it's aimed at people who are in schools. Now, this is an example of how a flowchart plan could work, and this could very easily turn into a mind map style as well. What you can see appearing on the screen is the idea of having different points that all support your argument. So this is an argument that you'll recognise from the article that we just heard read aloud. If we took that article back to its plan, this is what the plan might have looked like. So arguing against having chewing gum in schools, starting with a good opening being, well, gum seems a fashionable thing in school, before moving on to the anecdote about the sound of it being unpleasant, someone playing with it seeming to be an unpleasant thing to happen in school. Then the third direction of this argument, the third point, might be to talk about the undigestible myth that, okay, I recognise a counter-argument might be that actually chewing gum isn't as bad as people used to say. It doesn't sit in your stomach for the rest of your life. But to do something with that argument and counter it and turn it into something that's persuasive. Then moving on to thinking about gum terrorism, about it being linked to being a litter problem, and then using that thread to think then, oh, now as a writer I could talk about tarmac measles. Then I might think I've got some evidence for that. I'm going to use the Singapore model versus UK statistics, and that will then bring me nicely to the conclusion where I'm going to suggest how the ban would work in practice. And if you had time, what you could then do is, in a sort of mind map spidergram fashion, for each of your points on that flowchart, you could start just adding some extra little notes around it. So putting some little sort of sticks out of each bubble and thinking, oh, I've got this evidence, I've got this idea, I've got this anecdote, I'm going to try and use that technique at this point. And after 5 minutes, what you've then got is a carefully organised plan that you can follow once you start writing. And it absolutely is proven that students who spend that time planning write more effective articles. So it's really something that's worth practicing. So what we're going to do now is go back to the article that we heard and go through it paragraph by paragraph and just think about what this article is doing that makes it successful. What is it that's happening that the examiner is going to be impressed with? And we're going to start just by remembering that an article is going to need to have a headline. No point in chewing on it. It's short. It's attention grabbing, it makes a kind of clever reference to the idea of chewing, being linked to chewing gum, and it gets our intrigue. It makes us think, what is this article about? It's clearly got a link to chewing gum, it's clearly opinionated, I can hear the opinion in that headline already, and then that takes us through into what's called the lead, which is just one sentence, which gives a hint as to what the rest of the argument's going to be about. Good riddance to grotesque gum, says Stan Athol. There's nothing charming in chewing in the classroom. So it doesn't tell us a lot of detail about the argument that's to come, but it just gives us a little bit more than the headline does. So already we're being hooked into this article and we're seeing that this is opinionated. We can see it's going to argue against chewing gum in a classroom, and you can, I'm sure, already spot there's some techniques in there that help make that more interesting, like the alliteration of the charming and the chewing. We've got the byline, which is where we have our reporter's name and we have the date of the article. In real life, you'd usually have a picture, an image and a caption. In an exam, you're not going to be adding that, so you don't need to worry about that. Now, your introductory paragraph is obviously key. That's where you're going to set the tone for the rest of your article. And there's that picture of a hook in the bottom right-hand corner because that's exactly what you're doing. This is your opportunity to hook your reader in to your argument. There's a creeping blight afflicting our school communities, a so-called fashion statement that goes, and then highlighted here, beyond the trainer brand you're wearing, the bag you're carrying, or the music you have saved in your playlist. Here's already a rhetorical device, a persuasive technique called the triple, using 3 ideas together, because it's a really clever way of powerfully hammering down your argument, giving yourself a strong authoritative voice to start off with. It's already obvious from that first statement that the writer's opinion of chewing gum is one that's derogatory, that's not very complimentary, comparing it to a bit of a passing fashion fad that the writer doesn't sound like they've got much respect for. The finishing touch to the new version of cool in school, notice how that's put inverted commas, so shows kind of sarcasm and irony, again building this idea of idiolect, the idea that the writer is an individual behind those words giving their opinion. And then we've got some brilliant alliteration here: maddening mastication, monstrous mouth, all adding to the powerful nature of the sound of this article. You can hear the scorn, the tone of the writer who finds chewing gum a really disgusting thing. So there's our introductory paragraph that's supported by a second paragraph that includes a rhetorical question right at the start. A lot of people find a rhetorical question a really easy way to start their article because it immediately speaks to your reader and gets them involved in responding to your ideas. How many of you honestly enjoy listening to the sound of saliva swishing around anyone's mouth? And you can see we've also got those inclusive pronouns, so speaking directly to you, the reader, at this point. And then a second question. What exactly is attractive about seeing the white splodge of semi-chewed gum skimming over someone's teeth? So second question there, 2 rhetorical questions forcing the reader to feel like they're being directly addressed. You'll notice in the parenthesis, in the brackets, or should that be scumming rather than skimming, there's also humour being created here. And the examiners would notice there's already a range of punctuation that's at use. We've got the dash in that first paragraph, we've got the inverted commas for cool in school, and now we've got the question marks and that parenthesis, and that's all going to help with your overall mark. So we're now moving on to the development of the argument. Some people even play with the gum whilst they're chewing it. And you can see highlighted there are lots of words their, them or they. So this is where we're using exclusive pronouns to set the idea that there's an other in this article, that the people who chew the gum are not in the same team as the person writing the article who's hoping that you as a reader are going to be on their side. Really clever technique. Let's skip to that next highlighted sentence. I've had to endure this from the student I sit next to in my maths lesson. We're very clearly talking to our intended reader now. We're talking about being a student in a school, and that was our target audience because this is going in a school magazine. It's also introducing an anecdote, a short story, a real story that comes from the writer's perspective and experience, which makes again the writer form a relationship with the reader through sharing their own life experiences. And I'm sure you've noticed there's another rhetorical question at the end of that paragraph there. Next paragraph now. So again, we're building the argument. You'll see the chain picture in the bottom right, because what's happening is each part of the argument is linked back in some way to what came before it. So if you cut all these paragraphs up and scatter them across the floor, you should be able to put them back together in the right order, because you'd spot how the links are working, how one idea then links to another one. Those that regularly swallow the gum, because the paragraph before was about people who are playing with gum in their mouths, now we're moving on to the fact that some of those people will swallow it, have mountains of breath-freshening spearmint gloop lying undigested in their stomachs. So we've got some great hyperbole here, some exaggeration that's achieved through using the metaphor of mountains of gum lying in their stomachs. This all helps with this creation of the fact that people who chew gum are being exaggerated as being ridiculous, if you like, as doing something terrible. Now we've got some inclusive pronouns working well here. We've got our bodies are clever, complicated and canny. So if our digestive tract expels, etc. Inclusive pronouns making the reader feel like we're all on the same side, that we're in this together, speaking to our reader and connecting with them. And then there's some nice alliteration. Our bodies are clever, complicated and canny, and a triple happening there as well. So lots of persuasive techniques that pull all these ideas together and have impact when we're listening to them, when we're reading them, sort of hearing it in our thoughts. So the next paragraph, linking again, if this was the only problem with gum, so referring back to the paragraph before where one problem with gum's been explored, now we're looking to another one. This technique that's highlighted here, chewing gum fanatics, is picking up on that hyperbole idea and building this picture that those people who chew gum are in some way extreme. So hyperbole, making them seem like an extreme other and the enemy, if you like, of the article. And that's built really nicely here through the use of a semantic field, so using lots of images that link together, inflicting acts of gum terrorism on the rest of the school community. So definite hyperbole, definite exaggeration, gum terrorism, using something that's extremely serious and frightening and linked to the language of war and terror and conflict, but relating it back to this idea of chewing gum in a school. So this next paragraph, we're now building more evidence into our argument, adding different points to sort of add that clarity and show that there are many reasons why gum should be banned. So we've got another rhetorical question there. Why do people think throwing gum on the floor is somehow less selfish than throwing an empty crisp packet into a field? And that simple sentence that follows it, it is still litter. Really short, because it's powerfully hitting that opinion to the reader. We didn't need that to be a long, complex sentence. The fact it's so short and simple adds that impact. And that's going to help with your spag mark as well, because it's showing that ability to think about sentence length and the role of sentences grammatically in creating impact. And the semantic field hasn't stopped in that last paragraph. We've now got chewing criminals. We've got biological warfare. So constantly building up the people chewing the gum as being exaggerated, as extremely dangerous to the rest of us. And then some more inclusive pronouns as well, so to really form that bond between the writer and the reader. So talking about us as the victims of this biological warfare. I bet it's happened to all of you. You accidentally put your finger. So that repetition of using those inclusive pronouns there, you and your, making the reader feel like you're talking to them and their experience, assuming that they will be able to relate to this and therefore will agree with you about the disgusting nature of chewing gum in schools. Then let's just look at that final sentence before we move on. It might be better not to think about the bacteria that lurk within, delighted to have a new host. That verb there, lurk, creates personification of the bacteria that now sounds like it's a sort of thinking being that's lurking around in quite a sinister, threatening way. So we're moving the argument along now, so we think structurally, we're adding in another point, another clear point of argument, and we're moving on to thinking about the staining of the tarmac around school. So we've got a really nice metaphor there about the tarmac measles that's followed up as an extended metaphor by talking about it leaving a permanent scar. So using disease as quite an effective metaphor to make everything to do with the gum seem dangerous and unpleasant and unhealthy. Opinion's been so obvious all through this article, but here we actually start this sentence with the phrase, in my opinion, comma, these gum villains should have. That makes this particular statement seem stronger as something that's very much individually coming from the writer. And hyperbole again, the level of punishment that the writer's saying they think the gum villains should have inflicted on them, followed by the ellipsis, the ... to create this sense of a pause before outrageously suggesting that they're going to have to scrape the gum off with their fingernails. There's a bit of comedy there, which helps because it makes the reader sort of enjoy the writing, but it also helps to just show the absolute power and passion that the writer has for the topic. A really nice linking phrase now at the top of that next paragraph. This, so referring back to what's just been said, isn't such an outrageous suggestion. So really nice paragraph linking, and that's going to help you. If you can learn and practice doing that, it's really going to be a strong skill to have. Now followed up by some facts and statistics. In Singapore, a chewing gum ban in 1992 has succeeded in keeping the city streets and buses free. We've even got a quotation, first world oasis, but then followed by another rhetorical question. Why don't we want the same for our society? Brilliant inclusive pronouns there with the we and the our, getting us again to think as the reader about how can we not be part of the same team as the writer and what they're showing us. Now there's more factual statistical references here to give the argument substance. The Keep Britain Tidy research, which estimates 87% of city streets are stained with gum, followed up by the factual information about just how much money it costs for those annual cleanups. So it's making the writer sound authoritative, and like this isn't just something they're totally inventing. There is research, there are scientists out there who are researching things that are backing up the writer's opinion. That makes it harder to argue with them. And another great start here to this paragraph in terms of linking back to what's come before, back in Singapore, so pulling the reader back to remember that story about Singapore, and then again adding research, adding information about what happened there. but using that to then suggest a compromise. This controlled compromise would significantly reduce acts of gum vandalism, both inside and outside of the classroom. Now, we could say that's a bit of an opinion stated as a fact there. The writer's assuming that they can make these predictions about what would be better. But again, it's clever because it's bringing it back to the school context. It's using the information from Singapore, but then bringing it back to our intended reader and this idea that this is something about the classroom. And now we get to our conclusion. So conclusion's so important. It's the last thing you leave your reader with. And as a student in an exam, it's the last thing you leave your examiner with. You want to end with something that is impressive, that's powerful, that absolutely sticks to your opinion and the viewpoint that you have put forward. A conclusion is rarely the longest paragraph. It's quite often quite short, as you can see in this example, just 3 sentences. This isn't a conundrum that really needs any more chewing over. It feels now like our argument's bringing itself to a close. In fact, the writer's saying we don't need to waste any more time on this, and is cleverly doing that through sort of the pun of chewing over linked to our chewing gum. Another really short, simple sentence there. The answer is obvious. The simple sentence reinforcing what the writer's saying. There is no need for this to be complicated. It's absolutely clear, and I've got nothing more to say about it because I think I've proven my point. That's what we're hearing from the writer there. And then what the writer does then is uses a triple again to end the article, but also uses imperative language. So that's using verbs to sort of tell the reader what to do, to make commands. Add chewing gum to the list of banned substances in every school. Empower teachers to react to those who try and chew their way around the rules, some more humour there. And educate. So we've got add, empower and educate. 3 imperatives working as a triple, which means that how the article ends is by giving this idea that something now has to be done. And that's a very powerful way to end a persuasive article, because you're giving the sense to the reader that now they have to take some responsibility for getting things done, making things move forward, making the future better, looking forward to that. And that final exclamation, so we've got some more punctuation there, different types of punctuation the examiner's going to like. We've got some alliteration with the gloriously gum-free, and we've also got some humour. But most importantly, those last 3 words absolutely back up what the opinion and the viewpoint and the perspective of the writer has been all the way through. So hopefully, going through that article, hearing it read aloud and then actually looking at what that writer's been able to do has given you some ideas about what you need to be thinking and practicing when you're revising for article writing. But let's just sum up some of the things that you now need to take away from this. You absolutely need to plan your ideas. No more than 5 minutes. That's something you can practice and practice and practice until you feel confident about how to use that planning time. You know that your introduction has to be a hook. You need to use your introduction to grab attention for the reader, but what's important is it's the right reader that you're aiming at, your intended reader. So you have to know who is it you're writing for and how are you going to make your introduction relevant to them and their context. In the chewing gum example, it was absolutely straight away about chewing gum in schools because this was going in a school magazine. Such an easy thing that you can get right, and the examiners will notice that you've done that. Now, the main body of your article, the big bit if you like, is where you've got to show that you can paragraph and structure your ideas so they're coherently linked. So that means that idea that one paragraph refers back to the one that went before it. So it builds this argument and it feels like it's sequenced, linked together like a chain. And each one of those paragraphs must support your point of view. It must always stick to that opinion and just make it stronger and stronger and stronger, like building a wall. And then your conclusion, your moment where you take a bow at the end, has got to be a really strong, powerful, short summary of your point of view, sticking absolutely to what you've already said. But a really good tip, calling the reader to action, giving them a sense of something that now has to be done, has to be achieved. And if we break it down to just those 4 stages, hopefully that helps you feel reassured that this is something you can absolutely do well. So on that note, what can you now go away and do next? Really important is that you read opinion articles, newspaper columns, persuasive blogs, the more you're exposed to people who write in that way, the easier it is to then write in that style yourself. So I can't emphasise enough how important it is that you spend time reading those sorts of articles. You need to learn the techniques that help you write persuasively. Look for them in the language you see and hear around you. And when you see or hear a technique, it could be in an advert on the television, it could be as you go past a bus stop seeing an advert, it could be a bit of junk mail that comes through the door. Name it, explain what the impact of using it is. If you catch a bit of news and you hear a politician giving a speech, they are all the time using these rhetorical devices. See if you can hear an example of some repetition. See if you can hear an example of a personification or some alliteration. Name it and then explain why they have used that. What did it achieve? Practice planning and writing a clearly structured article. The more you practice this, just like if you were doing a sport, the easier it will be. So find a question. Time yourself to plan in 5 minutes. Do that regularly, and then sometimes when you've got longer, write the whole article. Give yourself 45 minutes including the planning time and give it a go. Revisit all the revision videos you've been exposed to through school. Use them to make revision cue cards, so you're constantly adding to your evidence of how you can do this, how you can do it well, and your understanding of that. And then finally, you do need to perfect your SPAG skills, your spelling, punctuation and grammar. You will know if in the feedback you get from your teachers, you're often misusing commas, for example. If that's the case, it's not going to magically fix itself the night before the exam. You need to find out when to use them accurately, and then you need to keep trying to use them correctly. If you've got no idea how to use a semicolon or an exclamation mark, and you know that you're not using a variety of punctuation, do something about it. Ask your teacher for help. Do some research about it so you can fix those little things that are absolutely going to help you improve. And that's the end of the video. I really hope that this has helped you. We've explored the big picture about the role of rhetoric and of opinionated article writing in society, so you should now understand where it's come from, where you can find it in your life, and why it's seen as so important for you to understand it and be able to do it yourself. We've thought about rhetorical devices, how they're used to create that relationship with the intended reader, how they're used persuasively to get a viewpoint across. We've looked at how structural features are used to make those paragraphs link together. And finally, we've definitely explored how planning is just so important, and you've got a strategy within this video that you can use to develop that cohesive and sequenced argument. Thanks for listening.